cape.
Welcome, Wargamers. My name is Doug with 2+ Stuff, and today we are exploring Aqshy, Realm of Fire. Now, Aqshy is also known as the Bright Realm, which is a name I haven't heard kicked around very much. It is formed by dozens of massive continents, and they once upon a time formed a singular megacontinent, and then the forces of chaos have so contaminated the realm that it's begun to break apart into these kind of far-reaching separated land masses, to the point where some of these larger continents can only be reached through a realm gate. But unlike Chaman, where it's very shattered and fractured to like little mini islands, largely speaking, these are huge land masses kind of floating around the seas. So it's not quite as abstract and unreachable as parts of the Realm of Metal. Now, just to recap here, every realm has every biome, meaning every realm has a forest, a mountain, a desert, the plains, lush green gardens, things like that. But there are a few characteristics that are kind of widespread among Aqshy. And this is that the land is very harsh and unforgiving. Now, if you can imagine, this leads to a lot of nomadic, kind of tribalistic cultures, as the land is very hard to cultivate. And while fortifications are totally possible, obviously there are extremely large cities like Hammerhall Aqshy, farming the earth is difficult, and hunting is ferocious because of these huge beasts roaming around. So when you think of the environment, the kind of general tone that most places are like in Aqshy, think harsh winds, incredibly warm days, lots of tectonic activity as these continents roam around, earth that is generally hard to work with, and while there are a lot of continents in this realm, really the mainstay of the lore in the core rulebook focuses on one, known as the Great Parch. Now, one thing a lot of viewers have asked about is what kind of people live in these realms, right? What kind of person does this realm create? Well, the widespread philosophy among tribes here is to burn bright and live well, right? Live fast and die young, as we would say in our world. Initiation rites and coming-of-age rituals are extremely dangerous. They often involve like cliff diving, firewalking, hunting, those kinds of things, and they're just as likely to kill you as to make you a man or woman of that tribe. They are dominated by societies that favor aggression, boldness, danger, and these things are a lot easier when you're young and impetuous. Which is really interesting because that puts them at a weird disposition towards aged people, older folks. Because if you are old, you're regarded as useless, a weight on society. But, of course, as people age, they realize how rare old people are. Meaning, if you lived long enough to reach old age, you must have been a tenacious survivor. You were excellent at surviving the wilderness and the harsh environment of the realm. So it's strange, when you're young, you have no regard, no respect for the older folks. As you kind of reach your middle age, you begin to have a deep understanding of just how difficult it is to survive to your old. And if you're old, you have all the wisdom in the world, basically, because you have seen so many more summers and winters than anyone beneath you. And so you have a lot of things to offer to generations that, generally speaking, don't want to listen. As I said, with that age comes a wisdom that can either be coveted or reviled. Young people dismiss it. The middle-aged, who are kind of more or less leading the tribe in their prime, covet it. They want it so desperately. And these are generally hardy folk who are just excel at whatever they're doing. If they manage to build a civilization and are farming and kind of working the land, they are the best kind of farmers because the land is so harsh. If they're hunting, they are a ferocious type of person, like doing that nomadic lifestyle, because they have to be in constant motion hunting their prey. And so we're going to dive now into sort of a general history of the realm. Now, here's the thing. This is a super in-depth story. It's actually probably one of the most in-depth backgrounds for a particular realm in the core rulebook. And it goes over the story of a few nation-states. Two of them were colossal, Bitar and Asperia. Please forgive my pronunciations if they don't seem right. And there were also several other smaller ones, Adrian and Capillaria. And they really took the themes of boldness and aggression in very different ways. Bitar and Asperia, the bigger ones, challenged each other to develop more. They both wanted to be the best. Their aggression was political in nature, and it fostered good trade relationships, sorcery, technology, kind of pushing each other to be better and better and better. In contrast to that, Iridian and Capillaria turned to more of the primitive infighting. This is more what we generally think when we think of Aqshy. They still traded with the bigger societies, but it was always for very short-term goals, right? Very short-sighted people. Live fast, die young. And the story of Aqshy, at least the Great Parch section that we have here, is kind of the drama between these nations. There was a small land bridge that kind of connects these bigger societies to the smaller ones, and orcs come on a big wall and rampage and destroy that bridge. and this really divides the nations all up. Eventually, Asperia solves the issue by burning the forests with the orcs inside, but in that time that there was no communication, something terrible had happened. And we learn here now that these big societies did a lot to keep the more primitive ones in check. While they were kind of cut off from their larger cousins, these smaller clans had a ton of infighting. It was brutal, and ultimately, one of these societies said, hey, listen, we're all killing each other for no reason. I propose a contest. Everyone puts their champions forward, and we fight it out in the battlefield. And we fight it out in the ring. No more mindless killing. Let's get unified. This was by a man named Threx Skullbrand, so you can see this is probably not going to go very well. And they have a big tournament to decide who's going to kind of lead the smaller tribes. One of the challengers in that contest was a young up-and-comer named Corgis Kull. Now, when the death toll in this huge, must have been a colossal tournament, reaches 888, things go berserk. The blood on the ground starts to boil on the earth, and the sky tears apart with a horrific scream, and Khorne demons pour into the realm of Aqshy. Now, all the tribes who are here for this big contest are instantly thrown into battle with demons of Khorne. Now, some obviously go and fight the demons head on, which only fuels them more. Some, however, turn to worship them. And from kind of the chaos of this event, we see a few champions emerge, one of which is Corgis Kull himself. He renames the humans that are following him, not necessarily those from his tribe, just any humans he commands to follow him become a part of his now formed warband, the Gortide. And this is actually their origin story, which is fascinating. Also, as a side note, this lets us know that Corgis Kull is extremely old. We mentioned in his lore video, which I'll link to down below, that he has been around for a long time, but we didn't have a crystal clear idea of just how long. But man, being around since the Age of Myth makes him incredibly old. And of course, this event is what starts the Age of Chaos in Aqshy. Now, as you expect, things go very badly. The smaller tribes are either deleted or absorbed into kind of the greater threat of Khorne, what we would know as the Blades of Khorne, mortals and demons. And to put it really briefly, again, this is a very in-depth story and I highly recommend you read it if you have the core book. To put it briefly, Kull ascends and he topples one of the big societies of Asperia and begins building his grand pyramid of skulls. Khorne's army smashes just about all opposition in front of them. The great big societies are all torn down and toppled, and a mighty Khorne champion who owes his allegiance to Archaon rises to power in the region, Lord Xeranax. And really, this sets the tone for where we find Aqshy when the Age of Sigmar begins. That's really functionally where the story ends in the core rulebook for the Age of Chaos. When we pick back up there in the Age of Sigmar, a lot of time has passed. We meet up in the book Warstorm, as the remnants of these empires are really just refugees. Sigmar opens a realm gate in Aqshy, not far from where Corgis Kull's base is, which as we now know is Asperia, or at least the rubble of it. And by now, Corgis Kull's pyramid has now claimed millions of skulls. It actually says millions of skulls as he tore through these mighty empires. Hammerhall Aqshy is founded, and civilization returns to the Great Parch. And in this area, wizards, this is a new fact we learned, wizards are highly sought after to kind of burn away the chaos infection. Now, if you want to know more about the events in the Realm Gate Wars where we saw the forces of order drop into the realm of Aqshy, push back the darkness, close the All Gate so that Khorne's reinforcements can hardly come in, go ahead and look at that series. We took an entire week to dive through all the books in detail and had a great time doing it. So moving into how we can theme an army from Aqshy. Gotta remember when we talk about theming an army from a particular place, especially a place as big and broad as a realm, what we're trying to do is extrapolate concepts from the realm itself and how we can include those and kind of represent them in our army. And so with Chaman and Realm of Metal, it was a little bit easier because the lore that it gave us was very heavily directed towards like mining and industry and minerals and those kinds of things. Whereas the Realm of Fire actually is more about emotional stuff, kind of, we'll say, more abstract ideas. So like boldness, anger, those kinds of temperamental type things, not necessarily tied to like an industry or something that's very easily definable in a model. But I do have a few ideas and we're going to be diving into those. But we're going to start off talking about color. Don't forget that Aqshy is also called the Bright Realm, so bright, bold colors really do bring forth those same kind of emotional tie-ins that we're talking about. Now, what I would say here is a few things when it comes to color. One is that contrast is king. Okay, by that I mean If you're going to have bright red armor, or bright yellow or orange, or whatever kind of armor you want to have, having a deeper contrast color go beneath it, so like maybe black slacks underneath it, or something to make the bold color pop even more than it normally would. If you have the entire model be that bold color, it kind of loses some of the pop, the impact. But having like dark tones and then having bright ones to kind of complement it go a long way into kind of projecting those colors across the table. Another thing I'll add is that don't let the color red define you. By this I mean a lot of people feel like, oh, fire means red, and so that's the thing I have to do to make an army from Aqshy, and that's simply not the truth. Don't forget there's a lot of kinds of various colors, so you, kind of the ones that stand out the most really are red, yellow, and orange as being very bold, poppy colors. But don't forget that blood red is just as cool and passion driven and looking into that as, say, a fire truck red, something that's really bright hot rod colors. And the same goes true for yellow and orange. So there's a lot of different tones of those things. If you head over to the Citadel painting app, it shows you a huge spectrum of all those different tones. And I highly recommend you really explore those, because what you don't want is to feel boxed in. Right, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. Don't feel boxed into those specific colors and whatever preconceived tones you might have for them. And since we're dealing with such an abstract idea, what you can really do to make things seem like they're from Aqshy is basing. Basing can go a long way here. And by this I mean, look at stuff like, don't limit yourself to red dirt, really, is what I'm trying to say. A lot of folks, red dirt is a cool theme. Jack from Rerolling Ones has a Khorne army that has this amazing red earth tone to it because it's like sand that was so coated in blood that it tinted red. That's really cool for his theme for his army, but that doesn't compose the entire landscape of Aqshy. So you can do things like a parched desert and put some skulls on the ground there. So that idea of dryness is a theme that you can carry on. Things like a cracked earth that's kind of withered and worn down, parched is kind of the real word here, are also themes that really add to that. Of course, there's traditional things like lava bases are really popular. And what I would add for your basing, remember I said before contrast is king. You want your model to pop off the base. And this is just my personal opinion, it's what I think looks the greatest. There's tons of armies out there where their bases match the models, and so the models don't stand out nearly as much. If you would have like a darker dry earth tone for your base and then have like an Iron Jaws with that bright fiery red armor, he stands out on the tabletop, and it kind of projects that feeling of kind of imposing aggression to your opponent. Now we're going to talk about kit bashing, taking various bits from other kits in the GW range, smashing them into your army and kind of creating a theme in that way. Now remember, what I'm getting at here is that the bits of lore and feeling and emotion come from the little things, little additions, tweaks here and there to models to kind of bring out really cool flavor. So we're going to head over to the GW site and take a look at a few kits. Keep in mind though that it's kind of hard to convey some of those abstract ideas, and so really what I'd suggest is picking one or two and really driving those home. So I have some ideas, not nearly as much or extensive as my Realm of Metal ones, because I've kind of been daydreaming about Realm of Metal for a long time. But let's head over here and see what we have. So the first theme I want to try to convey is a lack of water, which is a strange place to start for a 40k army. However, if you have some extra bits, or you know an Imperial Guard / Astra Militarum player, they're going to have a ton of these kits. And what's interesting, if you look on the sprue, there are a bunch of bits and bobs for canteens, water containers, things like that that sit on the belt. So I would suggest, if you want to go with a lack of water, having things that carry water is a great and frankly just very easy way to convey that. Now, even better value, this is more because a lot of these are in production. If you know someone who plays this army, they're going to have a bajillion of those things, and you can probably get a ton for really, really cheap. But moving into something a little more interesting is going to be the Frost Lord on a Stonehorn kit, or all the variations, whatever variation you want to buy from. And so the reason I say that is because this thing, which you would not normally associate with fire, has a billion little bits on there. So let's go take a look at those sprues. Two themes kind of come to mind when you're talking about this kit. One is kind of the tribal aspect. Remember, a lot of the tribes in Aqshy, there were really two main societies that were advanced. Everything else was kind of tribalistic, at least in the Parched Gulf or whatever it was, the continent we were focusing on. So if you want to bring home the tribal aspect, this has a ton of cool things. Everything from a little kettle pot up here, meat hooks. If you go to the next page, lots of barrels and containers. Again, driving home that we're carrying water because it's not found naturally theme, and I love that. Cool weapons, bones for, you can make stonehorn like skulls and stuff like that. A lot of cool odds and ends, and this page just kind of keeps going with all these random little bits. And so this is definitely, if you are interested in this faction, kit bashing things, definitely the main stop for me. Anytime you want to focus on sort of a tribal and aggressive culture, this is really a great place to go, simply because of all the opportunities you have to make something look very ramshackle, very utilitarian, and just mean looking with all the spikes and hooks and all those kinds of things. The water carriers and casks and jugs really add to that carrying water theme. Now, the next kit I want to talk about really is diving into that tribalistic theme. It's kind of my favorite aspect. I found the lore about the bigger civilizations that are very advanced very fascinating and very cool, but I love the aggression in the smaller tribes, and for that, we're going to look at the Flagellants Kit. And before there's any argument, let's go to Google pronunciation thing and...
Flagellant.
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 Flagellant! Okay, because we did a re-rolling once video and people were complaining about it. Anyway, so we're looking here at the Flagellants Kit. Now, unfortunately, GW doesn't actually have like the sprues laid out. I've actually bought several of these for cultists for various games that I've played, and there are an insane amount of cool bits in here. Everything, first of all, obviously you can see here the torches. The torches are amazing. They go together really easy. They're actually stronger than you think by looking at them in terms of like bowing and breaking. And again, all very crude weapons, very simple to paint, mean looking guys. This guy has a fire brazier strapped to his head because he's burning his scalp. That's how, I guess, loyal he is to Sigmar. I guess that's how you pronounce that, how you would demonstrate that. And just a lot of cool little bits and odds and ends. So you can really create a flavorful army if you focus on the tribalistic aspect by buying this in the Stonehorn Kit. You have things to signify carrying water, as well as the kind of primitive nature of the tribes that roam around there. Now keep in mind, there are a ton of ways to really show off those kind of emotional themes that Aqshy really brings to light. I've just given you a few ideas. I know people have created really great conversions with various monsters and beasts and things like that, and I absolutely love it. What I would say when it comes to painting, kit bashing, all those things, is don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself to fire. By that I mean everything has to be engulfed in flames. That's not necessarily how the realm works. It can, if that's the part of it you want to be at. What I'm simply saying is don't feel locked into that. It could just be heightened aggression. The large societies that we saw took that same theme of aggression and put it into political gaming and mechanical ingenuity to be better than the other society. So even having things like, if you're doing order, like the tanks, steam tanks and things like that would be very appropriate, as well as wizards who focus on diving into the magic of fire and things like that. So moving past the history of the realm and how we can represent it on the tabletop, let's just have a discussion about why Aqshy is cool. First off, it has a very sentimental place for me as the opening acts of the entire game. This is the first glimpse into the mortal realms that we ever received, and it's a fascinating place. In fact, one of the first books, Warstorm, actually had Stormcast Eternals sitting on a snowy mountaintop in the realm of fire, and it kind of confounded them. And so I love the fact that it was also our window into how vast and almost contradictory these places can be. The Stormcast talk about it's an odd place. It just feels strange to me that they can have snowy mountaintops in a place like the Realm of Fire. In addition to that, just going into the backstory that they gave us in the core rulebook, I was absolutely blown away. I asked my friends, what's the next realm I should do? They said fire. And I'm reading this story and it's just so incredibly in-depth, much more so than the realm of metal. The idea that it just gave us these incredible backstories for these huge nation states and how they have prospered together for so long, and then kind of the collapse of them and what caused those things. And really it draws in all factions, because there were bits of stories that I didn't mention about a necromancer attacking some of the smaller islands and tribes, and he went off and formed a flesh eater court contingent, and the Oryx were the one who destroyed the bridge that separated the big countries from the little ones, and really that's what led them to kind of infighting and ultimately becoming letting Khorne in. The story is huge and involves societies long since past. I love archaeology is a really cool thing to me, so like those ancient civilizations, but it involved every faction to make this narrative possible. And I love when everyone's included and how these four, we'll call them grand alliances, but really factions and all their competing goals smash into each other and make this kind of war drama happen. In addition to that, I love that because Realm of Fire doesn't focus so much on a physical aspect, much like Realm of Metal does with mining and industry, because it focuses on more abstract and emotional things, they really took that to the extreme with the way that they made these nation states. The fact that you have two big ones that took aggression, boldness, and wanting to be the best and all that kind of stuff and put it into industry and being the best technologically and politically and trade and all those kinds of things, and the other sides took that as very tribalistic. Like they're feeling the same things but expressing it in such a different way. We can model them to be whatever we want. And again, I think it's important that we don't get boxed in, and I think that was really the goal that they were trying to achieve with this dramatic backstory. Don't be boxed into tribalistic people who walk on lava all the time, and that's simply not the case. But of course, as we as modelers sometimes box ourselves in that way. But there's such a wide spread of what the emotions in this realm do to people. Going back to how kind of societies function, I love the idea that they really took the time to flesh out younger folks revile old folks because they see them as useless, but the old folks have all the wisdom. And I think that's a really important thing, where on Earth, so many of our societies revere older folks, right? They're the town shamans and leaders and politicians and things like that. To have a society that is kind of built and encourages a very short-term memory is a fascinating thing, because that wisdom really adds a kind of power that can't be calculated, right? In a realm full of young, impetuous folks, the guy who knows how to pick his battles is king. And I think that's a powerful statement on, frankly, aging, but how these societies work in general. And the last thing I want to touch on here is the fact that we finally get an origin story for Corgis Cull, and I absolutely love this character. He's such a BA in all the stories that he is in. In fact, rarely does he ever actually lose. Most of the time, Vandus Hammerhand just kills himself by having Sigmar strike him with lightning, but rarely is Corgis Cull actually defeated. He got knocked unconscious once, and that's pretty much it. And so he's just a powerhouse in the story, and we haven't seen him yet in sort of the malign portents section that we're in now with Soul Wars and all that stuff, but I really do hope they bring him in. It's not like he died of age between the then and now, because he's been around since the age of myth. And I love seeing champions rise, right? He was just a participant in the tournament. He could have been anyone else, but you know what? He walked out of there. He saw what was happening. He was like, yep, I'm on board with that corn stuff, and just went to town. Riled up the people around him, formed a super cobbled together warband, and just was like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to conquer this place. If you've watched the Corgis Cull lore video that I did, he made a promise to Khorne, I'm going to conquer the Realm of Fire for you. And functionally what he's done since we left him off was that he conquered one of these colossal nation states. So he's not anywhere near that goal, but he's certainly well on his way to achieving it. He's doing all the right things. And I thought that was really fun. But friends, every video is the start of a dialogue, and I would love to hear, first of all, your stories about the Realm of Fire, as well as what you think is kind of the best way to model that. Let me know how you display the kind of core themes in Aqshy, and leave it in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and happy wargaming.